I guess we'll get going then.
Yes.
First of all, I want everybody else to mute themselves. The administrator, the author of the owner of this Zoom session is not on hand, and he's the only one who can do a global mute. So in order to keep the interruptions down and keep things moving along, if you can mute yourself, I'd appreciate it. Of course, if you want to say something, you have to unmute yourself. And let's try not to interrupt each other or talk over each other or whatever. So maintain some kind of etiquette. We have a different kind of meeting today. We're going to review somebody else's system, but they're not a member here. It's not a live thing. This guy named Ken Fritz, apparently a wealthy person, created his dream system and then had a video done about it. And we're going to watch that. I've watched it already, online, but we're going to watch it via Zoom. And at certain points, we're going to stop it and talk about what he says, because he got a kind of different view on things. Any rate, and to join us with special status, we're hoping or expecting to have Bob Carver and Justus Verhagen, both of who are keen on ribbon-based speakers, which this guy Ken Fritz has used as part of his main elements in the speakers. So, but before all that, let's have an open forum. Anybody got anything to say? Remember, you have to unmute yourself.
I have something.
Go ahead.
Alan Southwick and David Weinberg, that's of the printed issues of the VAS speaker that they had. And I acquired all of them. I have a complete set plus a mostly complete second set, so I have no reason to keep them. If anybody's interested in nostalgia and taking some of these issues, I'd be glad to get rid of them. There's up to no more than 2 copies of each issue, and they go back to volume 7, some of the very earliest BAS speakers. And if there's no interest in them in the fall, they'll fuel my wood stove.
I have some interest in some of the early ones just to see, what the writing was like and the kinds of things they talked about. So I'll take some.
I've got the disc.
That's true, but to be perfectly honest with you, I have a set. I don't know where they are. Paper seems to be something I keep more track of.
I've got something, if I may.
Sure.
I have just recently been trying a project with another fellow, a musician, where he plays.
Right hand, Connie. How do we stay over that one?
He writes a piece of music, then he plays his part. He sends it to another musician far, far away, and he plays along with it. And then about 5 of these fellows are playing along with a track that they've been sent. And then he gives me all the files, and I put them together and line up the music so that they're together. And it works. I don't understand it, but you can line them up, and then you can pan them in stereo position, and then make a nicely balanced CD. And it plays really great. I'm surprised. I'm also trying to figure out how to edit discrete surround sound. And it is an uphill battle. There's no single source that tells you all of the steps in any particular program how to do it. If anybody out there knows, I would really like to get some help. That's about it.
Okay, I'm sort of waiting for Justin. This is Alvin Foster. I'm sort of waiting for Justin Verhagen. I don't see.
Hey,
I'm there.
Alvin, I just spoke with him.
I'm there.
On.
Oh, okay. I was holding off. What we have been doing, and maybe some of you, was find out as much as we can on our featured guest today, of course, which is Ken Fritz. And Justin Verhagen found some interesting information. So Justin, you want to give a brief description of who you are and how you're similar, that you design for people, blah, blah, blah. Go ahead, Justin.
Sure. So formally I'm a neuroscientist, but I actually dabble in audio engineering as you all do. I've had a great interest in ribbon loudspeakers. I wrote a book on it. And it's quite legible. And if you want to dabble in ribbon loudspeakers, it's a nice way to get going. My great inspiration has been actually from meeting Leslie and Alvin, and that really turned me into line sources, and actually in ways very parallel to the movie that you may have watched with from the late Mr. Fritz. So like Leslie, I've built line sources under my Purist Music brand, and those are all actively EQ'd, things like that. For me, I'm very much into surround sound. So to see that this guy actually had a nice surround sound setup was kind of interesting. So I looked at the things that were not in the movie, and I don't know how many of you have seen the movie, but there's a lot of things that are not in there. That includes things like measurements, how are things aligned in time and intensity and so forth. And it's very clear that this guy has thought through everything, and he's a physicist who thinks through everything. And he, like I think many of us, enjoy the process as much as the listening. So it was very kindred spirit. So the things that I have found online, some were interesting, was on Copper, the Copper blog from PS Audio, where the Fritz himself has written quite a few things about his system. But some of the key things that I did not see in the movie were, okay, what are the measurements? How was this EQ'd? What is the crossover like? How was that selected? Things of that nature, because they go quite a bit into like the whole design of the acoustical package of the listening space, which of course is key, as well as the design of the speakers themselves in some detail, but not that much. So the things that I was able to find out that were not in the movie was, for example, that they apparently use ETF to EQ it. There's like a one sentence somewhere that I found. Apparently the thing plays flat 105 dB from when it's 10 octaves. And that was not a bad thing. They use, for the speakers, they use Krell, electronics. So they use a second order octave Krell crossover, so 12 dB per octave. And it is a three-way system for the fronts. So they have, I think, at 60 hertz, it goes to a whole bunch of 15 inchers as a sub line, and then 60 to 200, I think, is some other driver array. Then 200 to, I think maybe, I don't know, I forget, maybe 6,000 or so is the Bollinger Grabner line arrays. And then above that, it's some other electrodynamic band tweeters array. But not much separation between them, supposedly, but there's not much data on these crossovers in terms of a second order slope alone. He did mention a broken Bollinger Grabner line driver, and that's not terribly surprising if he wants to play that loud and that low. The crossovers are fixed in hardware, so you cannot on the fly change slopes to frequency, change delays relative for the relative drivers. So it's quite limited what he was able to do there. But given that this is a sort of a horizontal Dapolito design, meaning it's symmetrical through its vertical line of symmetry, you should expect a symmetrical directivity pattern on and off axis. But of course, with such overlap between the drivers, that can get pretty nasty when you go off axis. And also that we don't know whether there was any time alignment applied between the drivers, and certainly the crossovers did not allow for that. So if anything, that is the weakest link in the whole system. The surround part, the heart of the system, is a Corel processor that supports up to 7 speakers, 3 in the front, 4 surrounds, 4 subs. So he has 4 subs. Those can all be time aligned relative to each other. So I'm not talking within drivers, but I'm talking between speakers, between channels. So that's great. There are 3 PEQs per channel in that system. So it's a bit old fashioned, a bit limited, but you can do a lot with that. And that is an automated part of the Corel system. I don't know how well that would have worked. I have not heard explicitly that they used ETF to adjust those EQs. So who knows? So in terms of surround, that system is fairly old, goes up to Dolby Pro Logic 2X. So does not have Z, does not have the high channel in it, which he didn't have, obviously. And it has no Atmos and more modern formats as such. And I think that's pretty much sort of the main things that I wanted to know, other than, seeing lots of measurements, and it is what it is. But it's an amazing labor of love, and I thought it was wonderful to see. So I'll hand it back to Nick.
Okay, I'm thinking that we should probably introduce Bob Carver, who's joined us from Seattle. So do you have any initial comments on what Ken Fritz has put together?
Wait a minute.
Oh, there you go.
Peggy's doing something. Are you ready for me?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was a magnificent system. I could not imagine anybody spending that much love and time and energy on putting together a system like that. Actually, I can. But it was truly magnificent. And beyond that, I can I can hear it in my head just by looking at it. And I can hear the spatiality that it has. I can hear the imaging that it has. I really can. And it was truly a fantastic, fantastic system. Now, I didn't realize that he had passed away. And how long ago was that video made? Alvin, can you answer that?
Well, he passed away in 22. The video was made, I would assume, about around that time, just before he passed.
So recently, it was a very recent video then.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Again, those are guesses. Justin?
Yeah, I understand.
I thought the video was 21, but it would still be like within a year of his passing to ALS.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I hope you had
21.
a great time listening to it. You had lots of funny music.
Well, does the system still exist? Does anybody know if it's still up and running?
He said about it that he would hate to see it parted out, and it'd be perfect for like some sort of audiophile museum, or like make everyone use it if you could.
Yeah, he did seem concerned and was making plans for what to do with the system after he was gone. So I'm impressed with that. I also love that he said when he got it up and running, if it didn't live up to his expectations, he would just deceive himself and say it's the best thing he ever heard.
Yeah, that's what he said he would do too.
Yeah.
So he anticipated the worst case, which didn't occur, which is very fortunate.
Also want to mention Ron Dunlap, who's solved it. In fact, the way this whole thing started, this whole meeting got started, was Ron Dunlap. You want to wave your hand so people know who you are? Sent me the link to the 1 hour video. So I was amazed that I could sit down and watch 1 whole hour someone else's system, but I did. And so did Ron. Ron, your comment. Now, Ron, as you older people would remember, is the designer of the Dreadnought 1000. And he had his own company way back then, but now he does mainly curing people with bad hearts. Ron, go ahead.
So this was so interesting that I watched about 20 minutes and I was hooked. So at 40 minutes, I decided I might as well stay for the full hour. And then after really listening and checking on this guy, I was excited about it. I'd send it to you to say, you know, I didn't want to waste an hour of your time, but I thought it was interesting to see that somebody was so committed. I mean, he got his ALS had progressed to his, you know, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which usually paralyzes you, but his was a little atypical, more peripheral. So he couldn't move his arm well. And, you know, he did a lot of machining. He had an incredible shop and so forth. So it appeared that he thought he had 3 to 4 years left, but it was probably only 18 months. But he was so dedicated to this that he hoped, I think, that somebody else would appreciate it and perhaps buy the home or the whole thing. I'm not sure what's happened with it after that.
Right, and no one quite knows how to, well, we can't call it, that's for sure. But in all seriousness, we all enjoyed it.
Well, I thought about calling Dan D'Agostino. You know, Dan was my first dealer outside of Massachusetts. He was in Oklahoma at that time and was pretty much committed to Dayton Wright speakers and so forth, which our amp drove. So I was thinking of just giving Dan a call because he had done a lot of, you know, specific and custom design for this man. So he may know what happened. So I'll try to find out.
Good
I
idea.
think that the interviewer in the video is Ken's son. And he's the one who's raising the issue. What do I do with this? So.
Oh, the interviewer, the guy with the beard, is his son?
I think so.
That is his son.
Not his nephew?
That was his son.
Oh, okay.
Well, the format, I thought, but for some reason, I'm running into trouble, but I plan on showing the 1 hour video in segments. And I've divided it into 12. And after roughly 10, 20 minutes, there'll be a flag that'll come up and I'll pause the screen sharing so we can comment on the different stages or the sections of the development at the time. So you can continue talking, and then when the screen share starts, it'll start. And when that'll happen, I can't guarantee.
That also means that you're going to try not to monopolize the conversation with your comments. You know, we may say, okay, well, we got to move on. So because we got an hour of video, we got a 2 hour meeting, leaves an hour of comments, 12 interruptions. It's 5 minutes per segment for us to talk. And I also mentioned that the chat box, the chat system or whatever of Zoom is useful for pasting comments, posting links, or any kind of textual stuff you want to share with the rest of the people. And you can send private messages too. So that's something to keep in mind. Thanks.
How's that? Is it there? Can you see it?
It's working.
Yeah, good.
Volume okay?
We see the video, we hear the audio, all is well.
Okay.
It is cracking a bit, isn't it?
reason I put a flag here was we can get comments on this flattened vinyl record approach, or how to flatten vinyl records. But when you watch the entire video, you'll find out that he also used a vacuum to hold down the album. So he used both the spindle compression approach and the other. So we'll continue. Comment, we've all had this feeling after working all day to try to get a component of our system working, and we finally get everything working, then we sit down with a glass of your choice and turn the system on, and it sounds great. And the grin on his face reminds me of the way I feel good when system's working good. The second part is his chair height. Anyone comment?
Well, it is a line source, so it's not, in my opinion, it's not so much the height of the chair, it's whether or not there are reflections off the back. And that chair is better than the three that you'll see in the wider pan, which are typical home theater chairs. So this one looks to be reasonable. The height of the back is the same as his shoulders.
No, it's above his head. The back is above his head.
That's going to block sound from the rear channels.
Yeah, if it's that high, that's not good.
It's above his head.
Say something you can. Raise your hand.
I'll go back and show it. Right there, his ears are right around the back of the chair.
His whole head is higher than the back of the chair.
Yeah.
Right.
Bob was about to say something, I think.
Well, I was going to say that it looks to me that he has an almost perfect place to listen to the system. And the detail of his ear being slightly higher than it should be is actually okay, because the material that the chair is made out of is soft. And we're all very accustomed to listening to sounds like that in that kind of environment. That's what I think. So I think everything is just fine. Literally.
You wouldn't have opted for a lower back chair?
No, I think it's fine just the way it is. A lower back chair, of course, won't hurt anything, but I don't think it's necessary and is definitely not essential.
Well, what about the rear channels?
He can still hear the rear channels. I mean, the sound flows around the chair just fine. Okay.
The first thing that I can recall that got me started on this was when I was a sophomore in high school, and I thought, well, it would be nice to actually record some music. And I started out with a small Ampex 960 tape machine, and after I had that, I traded it in for a 601-2, an Ampex suitcase machine, Had some microphones, Altic M11 microphones, put them in there, and some mic stands, the very same ones that we're using here. But I didn't do that many recordings in my room because it was a small room, and it was a mess trying to haul drums upstairs, and it was noisy as hell. My parents didn't mind because I was doing things at home instead of chasing around with hot cars and hot women, whatever it was. The best recordings that I made, and there weren't that many, were made on site when I hauled the equipment to a bar someplace or a club. When I put my gear in the back of the Corvair and drive someplace around upstate Wisconsin, it was generally in a club, and there was more room, and it sounded blended. But during that period of time, my passion for machines sort of morphed into not just the machine, but let's build a bigger system. And that's why I ended up with what I have here. Scott, it's good to have you here. It's been a while.
So I remember when I think I was a sophomore or a junior. So what, 27 years ago, we started building this room.
Yes, yep.
And now it's done.
Well, we completely finished it about 1.5 years ago. And Paul, good friend and helper of mine, we spent 5.5 years full-time on this room. All the hours that were put into this room from the concept when we first moved down here until all the speakers were in place and music was played, it's so rewarding. When we moved here, it was a 2,300 square foot rancher, and it's very typical of all the other homes in this subdivision. And the nice thing about it is that there was plenty of room here to add on. Music was always important. We began it at a time when there was plenty of time. The funds were there for it. And I didn't have any problems as far as being constrained by the size of the lot or whatever.
Blocking the video.
Whatever I wanted. The design of the room is such that there are virtually no parallel surfaces. The ceiling was patterned after a concert hall in Osaka, Japan, where there are 5 different angular changes, so that it to some degree will act as a megaphone, but it's not going to be predictable. It's going to break up the sound and give you good dispersion. The design.
I went looking for halls in Izume, Japan, and this is the one that I think comes closest to his description. And it's a large hall. It holds well over 1,000 people, and it has a 2-second reverb. It's modern, and the ratings are extremely good about the acoustics. So it's only a guess, no proof.
Design and layout of the loudspeaker system was something that came after the room was well started. Your brother Kurt and I put this floor down, and then it sat for a while. Business really got good, and there was no time to finish it.
And then it became a skate park for me.
That's right, that's right.
The picture of the Japanese hall.
You and your friends are doing skateboarding in here.
Oh, yeah.
So being able to design a system with no holds barred was great. I have not seen any commercially built system that approaches this size, weight, etc., mainly because all the commercially built systems have to fit in a room with an 8-foot ceiling. And you don't put an 8-foot tall speaker in an 8-foot ceiling, although some people do. Line arrays, I love line arrays. You have power that you won't get with just about any other type of a cone system. It's beautiful, and the nice thing about it is the sound is not restrained by the room at all.
Okay, he's commenting on the quality or some of the features of line arrays. I guess the question is, can't you do this with point source loudspeakers? Les Williams?
Oh, you can approximate it, but the cost is exorbitant in terms of complexity. The simplest solution is a line array, but I'm saying this because I'm actually in process of trying to mimic Alvin's system with a point source. It's extremely difficult. There is a German company that's got a halfway hybrid HDD. It actually looks somewhat similar to this, but it uses point source drivers and it does some shaping. But that's a very complex system. So it's a matter of cost and complexity. Here he had no limits, so I think a line array is best if you have no constraints.
Okay, Bob Carver, your comment on line arrays?
Oh, I agree with Les, and I love line arrays. I think the best sound always, if a line array is done properly, comes from having a line array. The depth of field in the sonic image for a line array is just spectacular. A line array can easily make sounds that go far to the left and far to the right of the two loudspeakers, and gives a sense of realism that's hard to achieve any other way. And yet, at the same time, within the sound field, you can hear the image specificity, if I can say it, but the image is great. The images inside of the field are very unique and easily heard and easily easily enjoyed. So that I love line arrays, and I think all my systems have been line arrays for years. Since I've been
Justin Verhagen?
Yeah, I totally agree. At the same time, there's a bit of a weird discrepancy here, I think, in the design. One, he uses line arrays, which are great for at least reducing a lot of acoustical problems in terms of reflection, simplifying that. On the other hand, he is designing a room that is apparently inspired on a huge auditorium, which has very different utility than a playback room. And so I'm just thinking back to the Ralph Glasgow's setup, right, where he had a space where he didn't necessarily care for it being an auditorium, but he just wanted to be able to reproduce acoustically, at least, or electroacoustically, what you would have heard had you been there. And I don't know that it requires anything in particular by any rhyme or reason for anything that's inspired by the Wiener Musikverein or something like that. So on the one hand, he makes this giant, this huge acoustical hall inspired room. On the other hand, he uses line arrays, which then sort of don't engage that, which is fine and probably preferable to engaging it, but it's a weird design quirk in my mind.
So you're suggesting he should have?
He should have, well, there is a fair bit of mention of absorption, especially I think around the proscenium, but around it, I don't see much of it. I just see some diffractive furniture, but I don't think in his surround setup, he wants to hear the room. He wants to hear the speakers. Maybe in stereo, he wants to hear more of the room. And maybe that's what the compromise was. Like you can't have it both ways without active systems, I think.
When you're an audiophile, so many of them get into it earnestly when they're middle-aged, maybe a little more. They have the money to do it. They own a nice house, and they say, let's get a stereo system going. They have to fit it into the house. I figured I'm going to put a big room up first so that I'm never going to have to worry about, I should have made the room a little deeper, a little wider, because I always wanted, a big system. So that's what we ended up with. I laid out the room that we have here. It's 30 feet wide, 55 feet long, and it's built like a rock. The walls are all 12-inch cinder block, Durwall steel in between each course, 1-inch rebars in between each vertical course, and then we fill the walls with 3,500 PSI pea gravel concrete. It's a hurricane wall. That's how they build things down in Florida to withstand hurricanes. It took about 5.5 years to complete the room. I had a company, Acoustics First, here in Richmond, come in after the room was closed in, and all the walls were all studded in, furred in.
It was hard for me to figure exactly how the walls were made, but we do know it contained steel, sound panels, and concrete. Anyone have any more input on that, or?
Well, it's more like the orientation. He mentioned it's 30 by 55, but the axis that the main speakers are on, if he wanted to deal, if you believe that sidewall reflections, because this is not a dipole, are more problematic than others, then I would have put it the other way, shifted it 90 degrees.
But I saw it is a dipole.
Yeah, most of it is a dipole, from 200 to roughly 7 kilohertz at least. No more than higher than that. I'd say from 200 hertz up is a dipole.
It would be interesting to run the resonance characteristics of the room based on the length of wavelengths and such. I know when I built my room, I had a similar type of issue and realized, yeah, I'm not going to get real heavy duty bass because there's no place for the room, for the bass to grow in the room. Hence, I have a subwoofer that helps along the Klipschorns, which are good down to 30 hertz. But what they're doing for the wall construction is basically creating a solid bunker. He could have done it underground and done similar things for solidity in the design. But you don't want the walls, you don't want the floor, you don't want the ceiling to resonate or to pass the sound. Ideally, with concrete walls, you're going to get mostly reflected sound, especially with what he did with concrete cinder block poured with heavy duty concrete in the holes on the cinder block and re-rod enforcement.
Yeah, his room has very little loss.
Yeah. So you're going to have stuff bouncing around the room unless you do a fair amount of acoustic treatment. And that's kind of the 800-pound elephant. Well, in this case, probably the 800-ton elephant in the room is one of the major components that very rarely gets looked at in a stereo system is the room. Whatever room you put it in is going to do things to the sound you're listening to.
It's got a lot of good diffusion though, which is good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And he's got a lot of damping going on with the carpets on the floor, and he's got heavy furniture chair here in the middle. And you're right. There is a lot of, Gary, you're right. There is a lot of diffusion going on around the room with all the stuff he's got placed in it. I'm kind of wondering about the grandfather's clocks because they must resonate if they're chiming, or if their chimes just hung in the grandfather clocks.
Yeah. Much absorption at low frequencies.
I guess he never says how high the ceiling is.
Yeah, he did. He did mention how high it was. I think he said it was like 30 feet or something.
In any event, it looks to be almost an ideal environment for a home stereo system, if you want to call it a home stereo system.
Yeah, I'm looking at what he spent for stuff, and it's like, why don't you just hire the orchestra in the hall and go listen there?
Well, because you only get to listen to it once that way. That's not a good idea.
Well, it depends on how much money you've got and what it costs to have them. You know, I mean, Hell's Bells, the water music, that was paid for by the king up and down the river. He hired the band to keep them entertained for the day.
Somewhere in the video, I believe he said it's 18 feet high.
18 feet.
Yeah.
I thought he just mentioned it when he mentioned the room dimensions, but there's a lot of non-parallel surfaces from the looks of it.
Yep.
It's an ideal room.
And because of that, they had Owens Corning produce the sound panels that are around the perimeter of the room. But other than that, there's a separate 200 amp service just for this room, separate HVAC systems for it, all 20 SEER, very quiet. The lighting, there happens to be 18 banks of incandescent bulbs. I looked at LEDs, they just didn't have the right cast at 2800 degrees Kelvin, so I used all incandescent bulbs, worked out very well. They're all controlled by 3 6-channel Lutron graphic eyes, so the lighting is completely adjustable. It can be programmed, so one bank of lights can be on 100%, the next bank down to 10%. It can be recalled, so for home theater, if I ever get around to learning how to program it, All I have to do is hit one button and the lights will automatically adjust to the way that they should be. The interior of the room is finished in such a way that after the 12-inch cinder block walls were up, waterproofed them, then furred the walls out with 2x6s on 12-inch centers and purlins every 4 feet, and then 3/4-inch plywood was glued and screwed to the studs, and after that 2 layers of 5/8-inch fire code sheetrock was glued and screwed to the walls. This was suggested to me by Jim and Tom Teal at Teal Audio. We had done some tooling for one of their loudspeakers, cast polymer baffles, and they were building a sound room, and they told me that what you need to do is use fire code sheetrock, two layers of it, glue it and screw it so nothing's going to vibrate. So that's what I did.
Okay. Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, you built all this.
That's right, yep.
Where'd you get the design idea from, or ideas from?
Well, line array speakers pretty much design themselves. They go from floor to ceiling. And because this is a 3-way design, the tweeters are in the middle, mid-range flank the tweeters, and mid-bass flank that. So it was a matter of choosing the proper drivers that would integrate properly. And right here I'm using 7-inch ScanSpeak Kevlar cone revelators, and then using the Bullender Gravener 50-inch planers, and then 40 of the Panasonic leaf tweeters, 30 to the front and 10 to the rear. The Bullender Graveners are dipoles, so they radiate sound front to the back. So in order to replicate that with the tweeters, which are monopoles, I have 30 to the front and 10 to the back. So the important thing was to make sure that I chose the proper drivers, because once something like this is built, you don't change it. Right. Everything is, you know, the cast polymer baffles on here. If I chose the wrong drivers, I'm...
Okay, did he choose the right drivers? And here, lessons where he does talk about dipole.
Well, there's so many choices of drivers. It's off the scale. Personally, I'm skeptical of overpriced European drivers, specifically ScanSpeak. I think you get much more value in the pro world at much higher performance at much lower prices. But this, the thing is, with a line source, he has so much overhead that that's not going to be the constraint. Probably the constraint on absolute performance here is using the B&G driver from 200 hertz to 6,500. And you can argue about whether that's good enough, but that's going to be the system headroom constraint, not the electrodynamics.
Okay, Bob Carver, since you pretty much designed the B&G ribbon, what about your comment about going down to 200 hertz?
I think it works fine. I mean, I'm assuming that he did all the things that he needed to do to make it work fine. He arranged the crossover so that it wouldn't be overdriven at low frequencies. That would be the only thing that I can see that would get in the way of making this less than absolutely superb. And I'm assuming that he did all that. He's passed away, right? So we can't go and ask him.
Right. That's correct.
So, yeah, I think it is just about as well done as anything can be for a living room.
Okay, with Les's concern in mind, instead of taking my Bullender Gravener down to 200, I took mine down to 800 hertz to avoid possibility of the issue. And I use crossovers that are closer to 24 to 68 dB.
That's great. What did you use below that frequency, below the crossover frequency? Because
I use 7-inch drivers from a French company, Les. What was the name of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Alvin's, I think were Focal. I can't remember if it's Focal or one of the ex persons who worked for Focal started a pro division of his own, but they're essentially Focal design.
And they go from 800 hertz down to 60 hertz. I have 10 on each side.
Alvin, are you happy with the way the low end sounds?
Extremely. In other words, you mean down to 60 hertz where I cross over to subwoofers?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And all the in between up to a kilohertz.
Oh yeah.
Sounds great in there. You're in. And the way I would measure its greatness is just ask yourself, do I like the way it sounds? No measurements other than your own perceptions.
Yeah, line sources are very hard to measure.
No kidding.
If I may make one more comment on the drivers, I think at that point in time when he built these and chose the drivers, because we have many different options these days, including air motion transformers. So he used like a large array of leaf tweeters, right, which were actually monopolar. So there's a discontinuity there between the dipolar nature of the speakers surrounding the leaf tweeters. And in order to ameliorate that a little bit, he put a few leaf tweeters on the back, presumably in anti-phase to also mimic the dipole nature of the other tweeters. That is not an uncommon design trick to do, even if you have a monopole speaker. But it's clear that that's not a truly symmetrical arrangement from front to back. So you can imagine that there are some irregularities in the 6 kilohertz up region in terms of directivity.
Bob Carver here speaking. I disagree with that assessment. I don't think there would necessarily be a discontinuity at all if the crossover is well designed and this whole system is well done, which I presume this is. So I disagree with you on that point. It will be continuous. It will be just a beautifully smooth fit.
Yeah, but
Justin, let's talk about the spacing too, Bob.
Right. The rear radiation is going to be not the same as the front radiation, right?
Yes, but that doesn't affect the overall sense of acoustic space that we have in our heads while we're listening.
Well, the amount of re-radiated energy certainly will.
Agreed.
So he only used like a small fraction of drivers aimed towards the back. We don't know with what gain or what acoustical power, but it is, it would have been, this decision would have been easier to interpret if the tweeters were also dipolar, is all I'm trying to say. If that was a ribbon tweeter, continuous array, would have been, the prediction would have been a bit more linear, I think, than in terms of space and frequency than what we have now. How that translates into sound and hearing is another question again.
Justin, are there dipole tweeters?
Oh yeah, there are plenty of dipole tweeters, as in ribbon tweeters or AMTs or.
There are even point source electrodynamic dipoles.
The magnepans, they're not up to shell, but so yeah.
I understood that his tweeters were dipolar. The whole speakers are dipolar,
yeah,
which is good, but there should be about 6 dB more to the rear than to the front.
I don't think so. No,
the top end is made, basically it's not quite the same as a Linquist design. Linquist had electrodynamic tweeters front and back and put in anti-phase, but the tweeters themselves were monopole. And he's doing that here, except he's using more than one tweeter.
Right. Magnepans are dipoles.
Correct.
And of course, I wouldn't tell anybody. I'd tell myself and everybody else it sounds better than I thought. First of all, the loudspeakers are 1,400 pounds apiece, 9'6", three-way line arrays, 24/7 inch scan speak, Kevlar cone mid-bass drivers, and 4 RD 50-inch planers mid, stacked 2 high and 2 wide. Between that are 30 Panasonic leaf tweeters firing to the front, 10 to the rear. The bowl-ender graveners are planar, are dipoles, and in order to replicate that with the leaf tweeters, I had to put some to the rear. The one thing I'll mention as far as the mid-bass drivers is the baffles that they're on. They're 2-inch thick cast polymer baffles, and they were these. I built these because I had done the patterns masters and production molds for Teal Audio for the Teal CS5i. They were the first company ever to integrate cast polymer baffle. And of course the mid-range planers, they're 50 inches, so they're too stacked too high and too wide. And because it's a horizontal diapolato array, these two, if they're only playing by themselves, the sound appears to come right from the center. The same thing with the mid-range planers. If they're playing by themselves, it sounds like the sound is coming through the center. And of course, with the tweeters being in the center, they all integrate fine. Before I made these, nobody said you can use a horizontal array this far apart. It has to be narrow. But of course, most people don't listen in a room that's this big and don't sit 23, 24, 25 feet back. So the sonic integration in this is as good as it can be. The speakers weigh 1,400 pounds apiece. The baffles, cast polymer baffles, I did the patterns, masters, and molds for those. My company did polyester tooling for the cast polymer industry. And each of these drivers is in a separate sealed enclosure. The cabinets themselves are 1-inch HDF, high-density fiberboard, not medium. And it's clad with Palfera, which is South American rosewood. And
the grain is, I mean, they're identical.
It is. My concern was, if I stood on the left side of the room, I wanted the left sides of all the speakers to look pretty much the same. You can do that if it's a laminate. But the company that supplied the veneer, they've just purchased a German machine that could slice this veneer 8/1000ths of an inch thick. So in order to do that, they have to put it on a veneer backer. So I had them do that. Once it's glued on, they slice it down 8/1000ths of an inch. So all of the sides for all 7, the 3 fronts and the 4 surrounds came from just an 1/8 of an inch thick veneer. The finish is all 14 coats of deft nitrocellulose lacquer. I use lacquer rather than a conversion varnish because it will give and move with the wood. Conversion varnish is generally used on commercial grade material, furniture, etc. Very tough, very hard. It doesn't have the depth that a lacquer will. Just like on a car, you know, the lacquer finishes, they don't do them anymore, but they're gorgeous. Easy to damage, but they're gorgeous. The speakers are driven by Krell electronics in the back. I'm using half of an FPV 600 to drive the 2 mid-bass columns. The other half is driving the 2 mid-range panels. And then I have a 3-channel 400-watt Krell amplifier in the back that drives 1/3 of it drives each of the tweeter columns. These are bass restricted at 60 hertz, so they don't see anything above 60. The same thing goes for all the surround towers. They're 3-way. Crossovers are all active. They're all bass restricted at 60 hertz. And the subs, which are mounted in the enclosures actually built right into the wall, take care of all of the low frequencies for the whole system below 60. That means I don't have to try to integrate a sub driver in these. Bass is non-directional below 60 hertz, so that's no problem. Each side has 8 of the 15-inch metal cone drivers that Krell Industries used in their master subwoofer reference, and they're very big.
Can you guess what this is? It's one of the most expensive subwoofers in the world, the Krell Master Reference Sub. Remote controlled, a weight of 420 pounds, dual 15-inch woofers, 120 decibel sound level at 20 cycles, and a built-in 2600-watt Krell amplifier. You can shake your world for just $40,000, baby.
Very heavy, very powerful. They're driven, each side is driven by a pair of Crest Audio 6500 watt Class H stereo amps. So
that picture of the subwoofer is the Krell version. He only used the drivers, meaning Ken did. He used, as you know, Krell amplifiers and Crest and whatever. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that that's the $40,000 system that he was more or less replicating. Comments on sub-bass choices?
Well, if I may, Quell actually demonstrated at one of the New York societies many years ago, both that sub and the those strings that are covering the line arrays.
Yeah.
Yeah. He used that for his version of this speaker. Quell had like a mini version of this speaker in a way, and he used both those things. I would just comment that you could get the equivalent of that Quell from a ProWell for $2,000, and it would outperform it. But that's just me, you know, my bias towards pro equipment. That's it.
Well, how would it look differently? Instead of 15 inches, you'd use 90-inch speakers or what?
Well, I mean, you can go out and buy just off the shelf a double 18 with more power, half the weight, and it costs $2,000. Powered.
Well, he's claiming a max of 3 inches.
Yeah, well, all right, that's between you and me and who's a German person who invented the measurement system. I'll believe that when I see that.
Klippel.
No way. I agree.
Yes.
With that. Absolutely no way.
Oh, you say no way? Bob Carver?
I believe it's peak to peak.
Even that. Yeah. I've seen Bob's subwoofers. They move a lot, but these kind of standard drivers, no.
It takes a lot to design a woofer. I'm talking about the driver itself, such that it'll move that far without distortion, without doing anything wrong. I mean, anything wrong. Overheating, making funny mechanical noises. It's very, very difficult, especially getting rid of all the mechanical noises. Most people don't bother because when the music's playing loud, you can't hear the mechanical noises anyway because they're dwarfed by the other sounds. Still, it's nice to have a woofer that's designed to move back and forth smoothly and quietly, and it's a great sense of acoustical comfort, at least in my head, when I have it working that way. If that makes any sense.
Bob, I have a question. You have seen these more recent developments on like toroidal surrounds or all kinds of weird shaped surrounds that have like ribs in them and God knows what, very far from like the half-roll surround that we grew up with. Do you have a sense that this could help extend X-Max linear in some ways, or what's your impression of it?
I don't know. I haven't looked at any, but I suspect that it wouldn't make a great deal of difference.
I see.
When a woofer voice coil has been driven by a very powerful amplifier with lots of current, with lots of voltage, and if the system's designed that way, it won't matter.
Right. Right.
Plus,
thank you.
Plus the constraint, and if you go in a really deep bass, depending on the size of the box, is not the X-Max. It's thermal.
Right.
And that causes distortion in and of itself. So.
Well, remember that this guy's using 16 or 24 of these 15-inch woofers. So he has a lot of cone area to trade off against X-Max.
Yes, which means he doesn't need the X-Max.
As much.
He's got it anyway.
Well, we can never have too much X-Max.
Substitute for Chardonnay.
Okay.
3,200 watts driving just 2 of the speakers. So there's loads and loads of power. Same thing with this. The Quell Class A's are beautiful amplifiers. They run forever. Crossovers again are all active, so there's no power loss at all using passive crossovers. The surround towers are 7'6", about 580 pounds apiece. They are mirror image speakers. Each one has 6 8-inch drivers, 6 3.5-inch ScanSpeak mids, and 6 dome tweeters. The left and right speakers are mirror imaged. All the baffles are cast polymer.
Justin, my question, you said his has 4 rear drive speakers. Is that what you're saying? 3 in the front, 4 in the back?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's 1 center, 2 stereo, and then 4 surrounds. And that's what his Krell processor would support, and not much more. His Krell processor also supports 4 individual subs, which is, a very nice feature to have in a processor.
And you had mentioned that you saw that he EQ'd it by ETF, and I find that interesting since Les Williams designed that.
Yeah, exactly. Les should probably comment on it, but yeah, there was one line that I read somewhere in some interview that things were ETF, but I think that was while they were designing the room in terms of the acoustic, the absorptive parts that they take great care of, at least in the low frequencies. But I don't know how far they went with ETF, if it was just a time decay kind of approach, getting the room to behave fairly deadly.
Look, Williams, do you have any input on that ETF?
Well, just that my guess is he did not do, for example, what you did in your setup, which was take each individual frequency channel and play it in the room, and then EQ it flat at your listening position, and then integrate each of the frequency channels. From looking at the design and those crossovers, I think what he probably did was put the system together as a whole and then EQ the sum of all the frequency channels.
I agree. Les, my comment on that is absolutely, that's the way to do it.
I built the baffles in the same manner as I did the baffles for the Teal Audio CS5Is, which our company did the tooling for. So the baffles, being cast polymer, are very heavy, and one of the purposes of a baffle is not just to hold the speaker, but not to vibrate. The only thing that should be producing any vibration at all should be the loudspeaker itself. So having a heavy enclosure and a baffle that's not going to move is important. To go a little further into the description, these are ScanSpeak 7-inch Kevlar cone drivers. Each one is in its separate sealed enclosure. This driver was written up in Speaker Builder magazine quite some time ago. 7/10 cubic foot enclosures, a Q of 0.7, and these operate from 60 hertz up to 200. 200 is the lower voice range. The mid-range drivers go from 200 up to 6,500, and that's where the bulk of the music information is. If we turn the tweeters off and we turn the mid-bass off, it would sound like an old Victrola where you hear all of the, the voices and that sort of thing. And then when the mid-bass get turned on, it gives a little more oomph to the bottom end. And when the tweeters come on, then it sparkles. There have been times when I've turned the system on and I forget to turn the tweeters on. And after about a minute or two, I think something's wrong here. I don't hear that sparkle. Yeah, I needed to turn the amplifiers on.
Sure.
The amplifiers are all turned on. They each have dedicated outlets. All the amplifiers run on 220 volts, not 110.
Why?
And well, because they're as big as they are, the current draw at 110 is quite high. And it's always best to have the amplifier running at the highest voltage rail it can operate on. So instead of having say a 20 amp, 110 volt circuit driving an amplifier, I can have a 10 amp, 220 volt unit driving it. It's always best to drive it at a higher voltage if you have it. So again, all the
would you mind commenting on this?
Say again?
Would you mind commenting on what he just said about drive the amp at the highest rail voltage possible?
Well, he was ordinarily, when one says something like that, you mean we were talking about the power supply voltage, the B plus voltage. But here he's talking about the line voltage. And it's probably true. I haven't actually done any work on that myself or any research, but high voltage is always better than lower voltage. It's always easier to make high voltage than high current, always. And so I would agree that having a high voltage amplifier is better than having a low voltage high current amplifier, either in the primary or the secondary side of the power supply.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered the question or not.
Yes.
Good. High voltage is always better than high current.
Dave Hadaway, you build amplifiers. Any comments to add there?
Well, it might make some tiny difference in very loud passages, but as long as you're not clipping, it doesn't matter.
I noted that John F. Allen, I believe he likes to use the high voltage power feed simply because it gives him a faster recovery time if you're drawing lots of power. I'm not sure it's significant in terms of what it does if you have a properly designed power supply, but he prefers that.
It just reduces your current requirements to put out the same amount of power.
Yeah, in essence.
Yeah, everything's easier to design. The power supply, it's just a lot easier to do it that way. The nice high power comes more naturally, as it were.
Ron Dunlap, you were right into that low current design. Any comments? Ron, is he there?
Oh, well, we were working with pretty high voltages, but the problem of the time was that the transistors really weren't up to stuff, so we had to really select them. Now you can buy 250 volt devices, off online. So going high voltage now is really not the problem that it was in 45 years ago with complementary symmetry amplifiers. So.
Right.
They're all turned on separately. The subs, pretty much the same thing. 3,250 watts driving two of the 15-inch drivers, and each of them is in its own separate sealed box. So it's not one big box with all of the drivers in. So each one has got the proper volume so that the back wave, it's a sealed enclosure, the back wave prevents the cone from traveling too far. But in effect, the cones don't travel much at all. When I talked to Krell about buying these drivers, they said they come with an excursion, an X factor of 3 1/4 inches. And that's because they put two of those in a 400-pound aluminum cube and drove it by a 2900 watt Krell Class A amplifier. Because I have 16 of these, when I talked to them about building these drivers, they said, we're going to go ahead and put a tighter surround with an X max of 2 inches on it, because they're not going to move much. And when I'm playing organ music or anything with a pop, I'll go up and put a flashlight on and the cones barely move. So they're all loafing along. It's not as if I have these two 15-inch drivers and they're really working hard to fill the room with sound. Everything in this system loafs. The mid-bass drivers, everything. And the same thing with the amplifiers. If the amplifiers are larger than they have to be to drive whichever channel, distortion is lower, they're going to run. I'm not going to say they're going to run cooler because they're all Class A amplifiers. They're running at full power all the time. But that's been the concept with the system. Everything is overkill. If it took 400 watts to drive something, I drove it with 600 watts. Money is not a factor. I mean, when you're doing it for the last time, you don't sit down and cut corners. Right, yeah. That's right. Most houses don't have a single room this large for any purpose, but that's not what this was designed and built for. This is the focal point of the whole house. While the amplifiers are the brawn of the system, this is the brain. This is the processor and all the associated equipment. As you can see, it has to be dark black. Nothing can be bright anodized aluminum. It just wouldn't fit, but there are exceptions. Anyway, everything starts out with the processor. This, of course, is a Krell. It's a
beast.
It's a 7.2 processor, 7.4 processor, and it controls everything that the speakers are fed with. This is another Krell preamp. This is actually it actually feeds the 707. Because of the length of runs in the room, I can't use single-ended cables. They all have to be balanced. And the Krell 707 only has one set of balanced inputs on it. So with the turntable being balanced, the CD player being balanced, the tape machine, the other turntable, etc., there was no way I could run 4 balanced units into it. So I have the Krell 202s. This has two pair of balanced inputs. So what I do is I run the CD player up into the Vercasti, which is a DAC. Then it goes from there down into one input on the 202, and then the turntable, which is also balanced, goes into the second. So if I want to play either the CD player, the DVD player, or the turntable, I select it on here, and then I select the balanced input on the 707. So it's more or less 2 brains. Now, besides the equipment rack, I have a turntable over here that I started building about 14 years ago. I had a couple turntables.
It looks like a sophisticated torture device.
It is, it is, it is. I wanted a belt drive table, but I wanted not just one drive system. The 3 motor drive units are sourced from VPI, HRX motor drive systems. They have 2 motors that are driving a 15-pound stainless steel flywheel that drives the perimeter of the platter.
So first of all, I mean, has this been done before? Where did you get this concept of putting 3 styluses on?
Nobody has used 3 of these. Now, there are companies that will have 2 or 3 motors to drive the platter, but they're small motors just like this.
This is the one component, sounds like he designed exclusively, except for sending the platter out for some sort of tooling. But his tone arms he uses, the non-direct drive tone arms or horizontal tone arms are SMEs. Comments on the turntable?
Not that it's bad and he can afford overkill, but mass in and of itself is actually not an efficient way to isolate vibration. The fact that it's 1,500 pounds, you say, oh, well, that'll solve everything. But as Harry Weisfeld told me decades ago when I got my first high-end stuff, it's the design of the table and perhaps using more than one suspension where they're not tuned to different frequencies will outperform mass by 10 dB or more and cost a tiny fraction of it. So,
the other thing I noticed is most of these tone arms, if I can see the diagram or the picture correctly, they're pivoted tone arms. They're not straight line tone arms.
No, not true.
There's one straight arm.
There's 2 straight arms.
There's 2 straight arms.
Okay, so they will track just the way the disc was cut with a straight line lathe.
Tangential.
Yeah. Okay, it's hard to see because it's very dark. The photography isn't that great.
So Les, I don't understand your design. Had he used multiple different absorption?
It's not my design. It's that when I first bought a high-end turntable, I got a Soda, which had its suspension, and Harry Weisfeld came and presented at a local audio club because some people were building huge masses. And he said, well, just put another suspension underneath it at a different frequency and it'll outperform the mass. And I did a little arithmetic and he was right. Also my comment, not that the spindle, the center clamp that he puts here is bad, but the BAS member who passed, I don't know how many years ago, Lou Souther, he did a clever clamp, which cost like 50 cents. And we measurably said that it showed that it outperformed these kind of things, which sometimes they charge $300.
What did Lou Souther's clamp look like?
Well, he gave you one, Alvin, so.
I know. I just want you to explain it.
But it was a clear piece of label-sized plastic where the center hole was not round. It was made of multiple, like a square. I think it was of 4 sides, just slightly less than the size of a standard spindle. So you would physically force it down and it would hold, but it had virtually no mass and cost nothing.
Well,
I harken back to the days we were fooling around with duct paste and basically suspending the entire turntable from a spring system, which got as I recall, the idea was to get the resonance down to literally 1 or 2 hertz, maybe 3 hertz. And indeed, some people actually did it, as I recall, and noted that as trucks went by their domicile or their home or whatever and vibrated the road, yes, you could see the whole platform move very slowly up and down in resonance to what the trucks were creating driving by. But
Yeah.
it isolated the turntable very effectively.
Yeah, mass would not accomplish that.
Well, it's a spring mass system. So mass plays a role in the resonant frequency and the characteristics of the low pass that you form with it.
Yes, but it's arithmetic. Here, it weighs about 30 times as much as a typical turntable. So you end up with, all right, he's covering maybe an extra 12 or 13 dB. But if you do a double suspension, you get much more effect for much less price.
It's amazing the increase in performance that a double suspension makes. And I once built a turntable. I didn't build a turntable, of course. It was a simple dual. This was many years ago when I was just getting into audio. But I built a triple system, a triple suspension system, and I was amazed at how effective it was. It was as if nothing was moving, and of course it was. So
what was your lowest resonance frequency?
Oh, it was about 1 hertz.
And the weight?
That I can't remember. It wasn't that heavy. It was probably about 30, 40 pounds, something like that. I don't really remember the exact weight. But I do remember the resonant frequency, and it was fun to watch it. It was fun to bump it and then look at it move. It was really funny to watch a whole system like that moving up and down at 1 hertz.
One thing that is quite effective, as you guys are mentioning, is a decoupling system. And if you do a bit of microscopy, things like that, in the labs, you'll find tons of these airtables that do just that. They're giant bandpass systems. And if you can find them online at LabX or otherwise, what you need is some air pressure, but not that much. And you can level them out, and they'll work with whatever mass you put on them. So it's about as good as what he's got under his turntable system. Actually, I would venture quite similar.
Yeah.
One of the things that always intrigues me about playback systems like this is nobody's really going through to what the actual production engineers did when they actually made the recording, cut the disc, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the sophistication in the playback system is generally, it's replicated in some ways in the recording process, but it's nowhere near as, how shall we say, extravagant. in some ways. And it makes you wonder, okay, they're playing a record, which we know has built-in flaws, to say nothing of what the design choices of the, or the producer's choices of the recording were, and the kind of equipment that was used to make the recording.
A very low cost way to get some isolation on a turntable is to just get a box, fill it with sand, and then instead of using springs, suspend the box on some low durometer sorbethane feet. And sorbethane is very good because it is not as elastic as regular rubber, and it turns a lot of any kind of vibration into heat. So for a few dollars worth of 4 low durometer sorbethane pucks and a wooden box and a bag of play sand, you've got a very effective way to reduce the resonance to very low levels below what the ARM cartridge resonance is, and also get rid of a lot of that energy into heat in the sorbethane.
Did you actually make such a system?
Yes. Yeah, it's, well, you probably can't see it, but behind me, underneath the window, is that box. And sitting on top of it is a dual 701, and you can jump and run around the room, and it just doesn't affect anything.
And that's Tom Parasola. Is that right here? Is that your voice?
Yeah, Al, it's Tom.
Okay. Okay.
Tom, what does low durometer mean?
I don't remember exactly, but I think it was around 30.
No, but what does the word mean?
Oh, durometer is the softness or hardness of the material.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, and the lower the durometer, the softer it is, the less elastic it is. And sorbethane is very good about not reflecting energy back. It does reflect some, but much less than, let's say, any other kind of rubber.
You can use a partially inflated inner tube as a very soft spring.
Yeah, but it doesn't tend to absorb as well. The damping is not as good as the sorbethane.
Yep.
Thank you.
In order to avoid being jumping out of sequence, Tom Parasola just built an ideal system, but he didn't use any dipole. And that's after he lived with dipoles for many years. Why did you switch, Tom? In brief.
Room. When I was living in the Chicago area, I had a very large room, and I could get the dipoles quite a bit away from the front wall. If you look at what Linkwitz recommends with the dipole, ideally he says you should be about 5 meters out into the room. Well, that's not real conducive for most rooms. The room I've had in Maryland and the room I have now in Pennsylvania, I can only get realistically, I can only get the speakers about 5 feet away from the front wall. And if you're trying to get rid of early reflections, putting a dipole close to a back wall, you wind up with a lot of early reflections, which tends to muddy up the sound. Dipoles can be great. It's like everything else in the world, there's no one solution. And for this size room, I relied more on the eggs that I built, which are point source speakers and room treatments.
So this is truly a one-of-a-kind thing.
Oh, yes, yes, it is.
No one else has done this.
No one else has done it.
And as you've talked to the people in your audio club about this, do you think this is an idea that anyone else would indulge in at this point, or is this?
No. There are plenty of good turntables that you can buy for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Why go through the trouble of building this? Except for the fact it's fun. The turntable is one that I built. I started building about 14 years ago. The table itself is 1,500 pounds and sits on a -K vibration platform that I had to make for me. -K produces vibration platforms for electron scanning microscopes, etc. So when I decided to build this table, I called them and I said, I'd like you to make one for me. They said, we don't make them that big. Well, they did. They made me a custom one. And the table just floats on it. All the aluminum pieces are all cored out and filled with number 9 lead shot and epoxy resin to increase the mass and the weight. I sent all the aluminum parts up to Krell Industries, had them brush them and anodize them the same colors, the gray and the black, so they would match all my Krell equipment. And it's a nice touch.
So if someone were to buy something like this, what would something like this cost?
Well, I've seen turntables that sell for $100,000, $120,000, and they're nowhere near as complicated and as involved as this. That doesn't mean that this is worth that. It is to me. And just like with the loudspeakers, once it's built, if you don't like it, it doesn't work, you're stuck with it. You just lie to yourself. It sounds good. But all the component parts are good. The HRX double motor flywheel drives. These two small motors drive a 15-pound flywheel. And of course, a flywheel maintains some sort of speed accuracy. Having three of them, each of them have two belts that go around the perimeter of the platter. The platter I sourced from Soda Industries, and they use it's a vacuum platter, which means when you put the record on, it sucks it down right to the table, so that there's no vibrations that will occur within the vinyl itself. So it's just the same as when it was cut. It's sucked down to a Neumann lathe, and there's no vibrations other than what the stylus is going to create.
Yeah, I remember with your the Soda Sapphire turntable. I wasn't allowed to touch that as a kid. None of us.
We all realized the advantages of the vacuum platter, but when I thought about doing it, what stopped me from proceeding with the vacuum approach to flattening a vinyl record was the noise that all the vacuum motors introduced. Comments?
I still use mine, and it's 45 years old. And the noise problem was easy to fix. It was a Soda. It still is a Soda. So I don't think that's an issue.
How did you fix it?
Sound absorption and a blanket.
But is it better than using the Souther clamp or the old-fashioned or the clamp?
I use both. I use the Souther clever clamp and the vacuum. The clamp is very good at if you have a record that's warped, and vacuum won't work unless the record is flat to begin with, right? And so the clamp, you just press down, the record is flat, you turn on the vacuum, poof.
So has anyone ever made an LP playback system that was entirely in a vacuum?
What do you mean? In a vacuum?
Yeah, so as to completely isolate the acoustics of the room from the playback system.
Oh,
it's one thing to have a stable bass, but you still have lots of sound pressure changes going around the stylus, the arm, the whatever, which are, which could do something and probably do.
I suspect the ideal there is to put the actual playback system in another room.
Yeah.
Isolated.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
That would resolve the problem, and then you just put the speakers in another room, and that basically, and if they're isolated well, that would resolve the problem. The other thing that struck me when he was talking about the Neumann, I'm not familiar with the Neumann disc cutter, but I have had experience with the Westrex disc cutter, and usually the lacquer masters are aluminum based, and then they're coated with a lacquer, and the lacquer is what the stylus system on a Westrex lathe cutter system is used to cut the discs. So the platter initially, if it's not been bent in travel, transit, or whatever, the actual master platter, or the master disc, if you will, is flat to begin with. It's a piece of, and it usually has a special extra hole in it that is slightly out. It's still under the disc, the label area that would be on a standard LP, but that pin hole is designed to catch a pin in the turntable platter on the Westrex cutter to maintain, to prevent slippage of the disc as the cutter does its thing over the disc. But the actual, as I say, the actual master disc is the lacquer disc has an aluminum base, and then it's coated with the lacquer, which is the material that's actually cut by the stylus in the cutter.
Well, it's interesting. One approach that this multi-millionaire system did not incorporate was the off-centered hole of the disc. In my experience, a lot of records come there's not a number there, come with a hole not exactly centered.
Oh, yeah, that can be another issue, because then you get an eccentric playback, although most of them aren't. I mean, that falls back to the actual pressing process, where for whatever reason, the pressing, the impression devices, which is a groove, it's not a groove disc, it's a ridged disc that is used to press the vinyl, somehow hasn't been centered properly when it was processed. Because you have to take the lacquer, you have to coat it, you have to do metal deposition on it, et cetera, et cetera. There's about 4 or 5 actual processes to get to the actual stampers. And somebody blew it centering up the disc that was originally cut, because on a lathe, with the way the center hole is done, you're making a concentric series of circles around the center hole. There should be no ellipsoidal or off-center problem. But yes, I've seen some discs that do indeed have off-center holes.
Do all cutter lathes have vacuum hold down for what they're cutting?
As I say, the Westrex did not.
Okay, and but others do. It's like
well, he was talking about the Neumann lathe, and I'm not familiar with the Neumann lathe. There was a vacuum system on the cutting head to pull off the chaff that the cutting stylus puts in the lacquer.
Right.
But I don't believe the table itself, as I recall, it had a cork surface, and I'm not sure how it was driven, but I do know that when it was engaged, it sounded like it was engaging something in a very large truck transmission. You would hear a loud and resonant clank as it would be engaged. And I'm not sure how the hell it was being driven, but it looked like it was some kind of either a gear drive or a very sophisticated direct drive of some sort.
And how heavy was the master?
Oh, the master disc itself?
Yeah.
Ounces, literally. I mean, it probably weighed not much more than a standard black disc, vinyl disc.
Okay.
But I remember when our cat jumped up on it. You were playing a record. I don't remember what it was, but I remember the cat jumped up and he just did the and landed right around the record.
He straddled it and it didn't skip a beat.
Yep.
And my first instinct was to go and grab that cat. And I thought, if I do that, I'm going to scare him. He's going to scatter. He's going to damage the stylus, which was not that expensive back then. But in any case, so I just went over and picked him up and set it down. It's just amazing how somebody can build a turntable and suspend it in such a way that a cat can jump up on it and the thing doesn't skip a beat. It's just a nice design turntable, and that's why I use their platter here. Anyway, getting back to this, I wanted something more than just a standard soda platter, so I welded up a steel form, sent it to a company in Ohio that casts lead for medical devices. And I had them cast actually I had to make 2 13-inch diameter by 1.25 inch thick lead plates. They sent them back to me. I had the machine down to 1 inch thick, to the same diameter as the soda platter was. Then I sent those up to soda, and they bonded them together and returned it to me. So in effect, what I did was embellish the soda platter with more weight, which I could drive very easily because I have 3 of these table motors. So the platter itself weighs about 92 pounds.
How much does this whole turntable weigh?
Well, from the floor up, it's 1,500 pounds, but the turntable itself is 750 pounds. Now the plinth that you see that this is on, that's an FRP laminate. I went ahead and built a pattern, master in a mold, trimmed it with some slate texture, made a 1/4 inch thick laminate and filled it with 240 pounds of number line lead shot and epoxy. So this part here weighs about 280, 290 pounds, plus the weight of the platter, plus the weight of these, and the base that not only the motor, but the plinth is on. I had it all machined out, and I filled it with more number 9 lead shot and epoxy, so it's very heavy. Now, having a table that weighs 750 pounds, and that's with the arms, 2 Kuzma Airlines and the Kuzma 4-point. All of the points that these items are resting on are all brass. They were all machined out, cored out, and then I filled them with number 9 lead shot and a polyurethane elastomer. But in any case, I wanted something that's going to prevent floor-borne vibrations from moving this. A company called -K. About 12 years ago, I called them and I said, I know you make vibration platforms for electron microscopes. I'm building a turntable. I'd like you to make one for me. They said, what does it weigh? I said, it's about 750 pounds. Well, the biggest we make is 250 pounds. So I said, you got to make a special one for me. So they did. Wow. I think that platform was about $8,000 for it. And that's sitting directly underneath the main table. And I know you can't see this, but it literally floats.
Yeah.
It isolates to a ½ hertz horizontally and vertically. So I don't expect any floor-borne vibrations, etc. coming up. There may be some vibrations from the loudspeakers themselves, but not with a turntable that's going to weigh 750 pounds. It's going to take a lot of acoustic force to move anything the way it is right here. So it's a very unique turntable. Multiple arms. The arms are made by Kuzma, 2 straight line arrays, line arms, and 1 fixed point, Kuzma 4-point. And I've got a number of top-end cartridges that I can put in. So it's fun. The design was, I started 14 years ago, and it sat for quite a while, but now it's finished. About the only thing I have left to do is connect up the air pumps for the linear tracking arms, and it's ready to go. Now the -K unit is sitting on the bottom, the base, and the base holds the preamplifier. Since I have 3 arms, different cartridges, I didn't want to have 3 separate preamps, so I'm using an Aesthetics 3-channel, which enables me to switch from 1, 2, or 3, and it's all balanced output. Not very many phono preamps are, so it sends a balanced signal here over to the Krell 202, and on the Aesthetics, I can switch from arm 1, 2, or 3.
How much of a sonic difference do you hear between those 3 cartridges?
I haven't heard them yet. I have not yet connected it up.
How did you pick the 3 that you got then?
I picked the 3 best cartridges I could find. Actually, I have 7 cartridges altogether, and I just picked the top ones all the way down.
How different are they even supposed to sound? I mean, I would imagine.
Well, if you read the magazines, one is glorious, the other is heavenly. You know,
the last one is euphonic.
That's right. That's right. So there's a little difference, and what I'm looking to do is, because I have 3, if I live long enough, I'll know that if I play this particular LP, I want to use this cartridge because it sounds better than that cartridge or this arm. And what I'll be able to do is actually switch with all 3 arms playing at the same time, go from one to the other. And now that it's all finished, I call it the Franken table. I'm sure it's going to sound fine. And if it doesn't, I'll lie to myself and say it sounds as good as anything I've heard.
So are these bases underneath the amp, is that just for the amp, or is that actually to help the speakers stay where it is?
That actually, the speakers are bolted to that, and the idea was, because the speakers are as tall and as heavy as they are, I thought maybe I need a counterweight so that there's not going to be a chance they're going to fall over.
Kickstand.
There we go. So this is 1-inch aluminum plate. So I had this designed so that I could put the power amplifier that's driving it right behind it. When you have amplifiers and speakers, what you want to do is try to keep the cables from the amplifiers to the speakers as short as you can, so you don't have line loss. No, they make speaker cables for ridiculous amounts of money, just like they do for everything else. Doesn't mean they're better or they're worse, but they just happen to be at a different price. So what I did here, I bought these cables. They're 8-gauge silver cables. Bought them from a good friend of mine that sells audio gear, and it's called Luminous Audio. And he had a roll of this probably 20 years ago, and he had it, and I needed some cable, and I said, Tim, why don't I just buy this from me? So he sold it to me. It was a good price. There's not many people who are going to buy 8-gauge silver wire. So I've used that for all of the amplifiers. It's the white cable that you see. And I've got the...
I'll stop it here for a second. Is there any advantage to using silver wire? Of course, 8-gauge is a good idea, but silver wire, is there any advantage to using silver versus copper versus aluminum?
No.
Versus aluminum?
Yes. Technically, silver has a higher conductivity than copper, sorry.
So what? Just make the copper thicker.
Right.
That's an alternative.
I think you have to look at the same kind of situation as damping factors and amplifiers. At some point, when you look at the DC resistance of the voice coils of the drivers, you start getting down into lower and lower resistance, which really becomes less and less important. So, you know, if you've got 8-gauge silver or 8-gauge copper or 8-gauge aluminum, assuming you don't have corrosion at the terminations, it really shouldn't matter.
I just looked up on Google, the difference in conductivity is 7%.
Silver over copper?
Yeah, so that's less than 1 gauge.
And he's talking a short length of maybe a foot per wire to get connected to the speakers. Now, then again, if you've got to bridge all the drivers together, was he using 8-gauge wire for that too? Likely not, it wouldn't fit. So.
Then you have skin effect.
It's kind of overkill, I think.
The whole system is overkill.
Well, that's true.
Overkill is good, huh?
Make sure it's dead.
Okay.
Crimp on and soldered rhodium spade lugs for it. That means I can keep the amplifier close to the speakers, so there's less power loss there.
How much do these amps weigh?
These amps weigh 220 pounds apiece, and they're up on stands made out of the 80-20 material. So I wanted to get them up high, so there's plenty of convection current. So it keeps, because they get very hot. Not only are the fins hot when they're running, but they're sharp as razors. I don't know how many times I got cut my legs walking by here or standing over it, not paying attention. But anyway, that's the idea. The amplifier is very close to the speakers they're driving. The electronics are all from Krell Industries. Beautiful equipment, runs forever. The amplification is all Krell, a dozen Krell amplifiers in the system. The crossovers for the 3 front channels are all Krell KBX active crossovers, so I'm not wasting any power in passive crossover networks. Active, if you can design around them, are probably the best way to go. Now the signal to the amplifier comes from the Krell active crossovers down here. There are 3 of them, one for the left, one for the center, one for the right. The cables.
Did you make this piece of furniture?
Yes, yes. In fact, all the furniture here I made. Wanted the, it's all cherry, and I didn't want any furniture that looked like it's too big, too small, too deep for the equipment. So I figured I'll get all the equipment first, and then I'm going to build furniture that more or less coincides this piece with that one. So all the furniture in the room I went ahead and designed and built. It's all cherry, and when you build it, you don't have to have shelves that are a foot high with something that's only 3 inches high in the bottom. In the rear, you'll see the 3-channel Krell 400 watt per channel amplifier, and that's only used just for the tweeters. That's about 195 pounds. Again, it's pure Class A. The only thing I don't like about it is it's not anodized black. What can I say? But other than that,
it's hidden from view. So
that's right. And all the equipment here is fed by this PS Audio P10, a regenerator. It takes the incoming AC, rectifies it to DC, and then chops it back. The people at Krell have been very helpful. When I was almost finished with the loudspeakers, I purchased some grill cloth material from Teal Audio, and that's what I was going to use. And at that time, Krell came out with their own line of speakers, and they had a very sexy type of grill cloth. They used 80 thousandths diameter extruded EPDM rubber strings. Dan D'Agostino was a distributor for Sonus Faber loudspeakers way back when, and Sonus Faber, being made in Italy, took rubber strings and they wrapped silk around them. Very fine. Dan thought, that's a cool idea. I think I'm going to see if I can replicate it. So we did. And when I got to the point where the speakers were almost finished, I said, would you mind if I would adopt your idea and use the strings? So he made it possible for me to purchase, I don't know how many, a couple miles of 80,000 EPDM rubber, and I still have more than I need. But we built the looms, and all of the grills are sexy 80,000 diameter rubber strings. They're beautiful, and they do not negatively affect the sound. It was my concern that because it was a solid material, that it may have some negative effect on the dispersion of the sound. So I made a frame about 2 by 2 feet with the rubber EPDM strung the same way as I was going to do in the speaker. And then my wife went ahead and passed it back in front and off to the side of a speaker while it was playing, so I can see if it had any deleterious effects, and it didn't. So we went ahead and used the rubber strings. It looks nice. It's an aesthetic addition that stands out. No one else does this. No one else goes through this much trouble to make a speaker look good, not just sound good. And we have the clocks in the back, and I love clocks also. And they sort of blend in with the height of the speakers, and they too are elegant looking, just as other speakers.
Yeah, I had no idea you did anything with clocks. That was what Kurt was telling me, and I never knew any of that.
Sure, yeah. It's hard to sit and do nothing day after day after day. If you're sick, you don't feel well. We all get in moods where we just don't want to do anything. Maybe I sit down and watch TV or read a magazine or whatever. But every once in a while, a person has got to say to themselves, I just cannot go day after day without accomplishing something. They say when you're retired, you shouldn't have to do anything. I don't buy that at all, at least not for me. But fortunately, all my goals have been fulfilled. I've built everything I wanted to build. If the mind doesn't keep the body going, and the body doesn't fulfill the thoughts that a man has, he becomes senseless. I mean, you might as well just pack it up. But I'm retired, so to speak, but still, since we closed the company and sold everything, I'm always doing something. Of course, finishing the room took 5.5 years. Being 76 now, I don't have to put in that many hours, but there are little things that I plan on doing. Maybe another few cabinets, or maybe another clock or something. If you don't have that purpose, the day is a wasted day.
I remember back when you started doing well with the company, you bought a Rolex. Remember that?
That's right, yeah.
And now I'm learning that you used to build the clocks. Why do you think you're focused on time so much?
Well, they're beautiful for one thing, and they're all different. Even though they serve the same purpose, they tell you whether it's noon or 3 or 4 or 5. It's a piece of furniture that can blend in with either your home, your other furniture, or let's just build a clock that looks so different than anything else. Not because you need another clock or because you have a table that would look better if it had a clock on. It's just another form of expression. Probably the same as I'm going to sit down and write a song, which I obviously can't do. You might write 10 songs. They're all very good, but they're all different. And you write them all, you compose them all based on the mood that you're in. And the clocks were nice. They weren't big. They were fancy. They were intricate. And it's nice to be able to use your God-given talents in a way that showcases what you're able to do. And especially if you're not just building something, a kit or whatever it is. If you say, I'm going to take this clock movement and I'm going to build a case around it, don't know what it's going to look like yet, but I'll think about it. And when it's done, it's great. Then you think, I didn't waste my time. I think I'll do it again.
Let me comment here. He's been a little bit philosophical, but his issue of retirement addresses a lot of people that are members of the Boston Audio Society. Several of us have retired. Some of us are working just as hard retired as we were employed almost. But he believes, and I think Bob Carver, you might agree with him, to sit down and do nothing is tantamount to a death sentence.
That's right. I agree with you. Can't be done.
The only difference I found is that when you're retired, you can do what you want to do when you want to do it.
That's right. Agreed.
And I also find it interesting, he has other hobbies like building clocks. My other hobby, I guess, would be cameras, I guess. Tom Perazzola, you do cameras too? If Tom is
not so much anymore. You know, I worked for several photo companies for a long time, and I worked my way through school as a photographer. But it's like anything else. If it becomes a business, it loses some of its excitement. So although I do have some very interesting one-off cameras and electronic flash units and stuff, I really don't do much photography except if I'm doing documentation for my magazine articles.
Alvin, what do you do?
I probably, outside of traveling, I enjoy photography.
Wow. Well, I like model airplanes. I fly. So one of my hobbies is model airplanes. The other is audio.
Okay.
I think failure to challenge both yourself mentally and physically in retirement is actually a very dangerous thing. It's very bad for you. So exercising your brain and using your mental capacity really can prolong your function, and certainly exercising using your body and your joints really benefit from motion and being challenged. So, you know, the idea of retiring and just sitting around is really not viable, not for a long retirement anyway. It's not a viable.
It sure seems to be true. It actually does.
Well, Ron Dunlap, you're speaking as a physician, but what do you do in retirement?
I do some woodworking, and I'm building 2 home theater rooms. And so I'm doing some construction and sort of getting ready to optimize my audio system, watching videos on room construction, residences, and other things. So I just came across this because every afternoon I kind of sit around and see what I can find online. There's a lot of interesting things. So some of what he did here, you know, that 2x4s actually resonate. So actually, if you put plywood in parallel with the 2x4, apparently it really dampens the vibration in the walls and so forth. So a lot of these high-end systems, I've looked at a lot of professionals installers, and that seems to be something that's worthwhile. But a lot of them even put double layers of sheetrock up, which I'm not sure is practical. But the interesting thing is that Elon Musk has a 5-channel system which he uses for gaming, and his screen is a white sheet.
What do you mean, a white sheet cloth?
A cloth sheet, right? He's cheap.
Wow.
Yeah, you ought to try what I had recommended for my ceiling, Ron, which is I had separated joists on block concrete. They were separated from the room above, which is the kitchen. So they were basically rested on the walls and weren't attached to the flooring above. They were interleaved with the existing joists holding up the floor of the kitchen. The whole area was then filled with fiberglass, and then a layer of, oh God, I think it was 16th inch thick lead sheeting was applied all over that ceiling and caulked on all the cavities, or all the joints, basically. They were butted together, but then the butt was covered with caulk. And then there were 2 layers of wallboard attached over that. And by God, it does work pretty well. That was a real favor I got from the folks at Accentech, specifically, oh, he's a member too. And right now the name escaped, Tom Harrell. was instrumental in getting me that info. And I would guess it was probably several $1,000s worth of free consulting, but it works and it's very effective. But I'm not so sure about the walls. I think covering them with lead would be a little interesting. I have, again, cinder block walls, and I had them filled with sand, just loose sand, instead of having poured concrete into them. And that seems to work pretty well for keeping the room reasonably well isolated from everything around me. I'm in my basement, and I didn't have the opportunity to go ahead and build it in a ground space when the building was built, but it would have taken a lot more grief to do it. The other big thing was they actually took the 8-foot ceiling height that's standard and raised it using a knee wall, an actual wooden knee wall, and raised it another 2 feet to give me about a 10-foot ceiling.
Well, sounds like we're all staying busy, the ones of us that are able to retire, but I guess that's the right therapy, but it seems like to me you might wear out your brain.
Going back for a minute to sound isolation, another economical way to do that is a material called Homosote 440. It's what I use in my audio room, and that one layer of Homosote is the equivalent sound rejection of two walls of 5/8 inch drywall separated on alternating studs with insulation.
Wow.
So it is a very cost-effective way to do it. And the only thing is you have to do the install correctly. When you put the Homosote up, you fasten it to the studs. And then when you put the drywall over the Homosote, you don't fasten to the studs, you fasten to the Homosote. And that eliminates an awful lot. Like I said, it's about the equivalent of a wall that has alternating studs and insulation.
Yeah, speaking of insulation, another thing that I did do some digging on when I was trying to redo my room sound absorption. The stuff to use, without a doubt, is not fiberglass, it's rock wool. Rock wool has a much better sound absorbent capability than fiberglass does. And I have not yet designed or fitted panels into the room made of it, but even the guys on this old house used it on a recent house they built for soundproofing. And it's also a good insulator.
Okay, we'll proceed.
Well, I have 5,400 man hours in building the speakers. I kept track of that. Now, that's a lot of time. So it's been 25, 30 years from the beginning of the room until it's finished now. It took so many years to finish this up. And while I was designing it and building it, I knew it was going to take time, and I knew it was going to take money. And I didn't have to get it done right off the bat. The room and the system together, probably $1.75 million, I'd say it would be that. I couldn't build it for that if I had to pay somebody else to do that. It was a fun journey. It was almost, the journey is better than the destination. Everybody says that. But now that I've reached the destination, the music is going to tell me every time I put it on, you didn't waste your time and money. You spent your time and money wisely. So enjoy it, and I will. We put the music on when the spirit moves you.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
When you feel you need to hear something, it makes you feel good. Or if you're in a melancholy mood, what do you play to snap you out of it or reinforce your feelings? So that's a nice thing about music. There is always something that fits your mood. Now, I haven't been playing music in this room for 5.5 years. This room was dead quiet while we were working on it. But now that it's all finished, we just happened to pick out a copy of Swan Lake on the Lode Angel. Don't remember where I bought it, when I bought it, who I got it from. And it appears as though it's brand new. It's no spindle marks on it. And I'm probably going to go ahead and play that in the next few days just to see what it sounds like. I probably have a dozen, maybe 24 different recordings of Swan Lake, all my all-time favorite classical work. And they all sound a little bit different, but they're all good. Okay, now we're in the music room edition. which I put on to house the records. We have about 28,000 LPs here, and also more equipment. Another sound system up here, and to make it easy to find the LPs, I put LED lighting under all the shelves.
That's nice.
Well, there's more than this. All these boxes that you see all around to the right, back over there, that's more vinyl that I have to go through. Now, one thing you have to, I'm sure you realize, you don't go out and buy records 1 or 2 or 3 at a time and end up with 28,000 LPs.
Unless you're Steve
So
O'Wady.
I would buy collections from somebody. I just go and look and see what type of music that person had, give them a price on it. If they wanted to get rid of it, I'd buy it. And that's why there's so many more boxes around here. And then all I did was alphabetize them. Here's Coppelia, I love that. Leo Delibes.
Nice.
London. Beethoven Centennial Collection
Nice.
with about 6 or 7 or 8 volumes. I don't have to go, but they're in great shape, and they're $2 for the whole thing because nobody cares for them, you know.
Yep.
And I have all the rest of them in some of these boxes, but in any case, there's so much here. I'll probably never live long enough to listen to them, and of course there's more piled up here, not just LPs, but more electronics, amplifiers, speakers, etc. that I'll probably have to find new homes for because can't even see the windows that I have on the outside there. But in any case.
Oh, there are windows behind this?
Yep, they're octagon windows across that.
Fine.
No, I'm going to run out of space pretty fast, and I'll say.
To build another room with more shelves.
Right.
Okay.
Actually, in order for me to get this room built, I had to buy 10 feet of land from my neighbor.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't have enough room with the offsets. I would have had to put on about a 4-foot wide room. So I went to my neighbor. I said, Keith, how would you like to send me some of your land? Sell me some of your land. He sold me. I think it was 8 or 9 feet, and I paid him $500 for that.
No way.
And it cost me another $9,500 to have it surveyed, to have his mortgage company take that off,
No kidding.
and all the other
Why would he
BS.
sell for $500? He could have
Because
got more than that.
he wanted the money, you know? And he didn't do anything with the land anyway. So then I went ahead and tore out the land, you know, and put a slab down here. And it's good because even though there are lots of boxes here, there's no room in that. I did not want that music room to look like Plan 9 records with record shelves all over, record bins. So it's nice, but then because I had room, I kept buying things like tuner amplifiers, more speakers because they were nice, and I just wanted to have them. So now the time is to sell them all and get some cash out of it and free up some room. But of course, the days are coming to an end, so I can't keep thinking, well, maybe I'll do it next year or the year after that. The future is now. And I'm looking forward to finally getting around to doing what I should have been doing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but never had the time to because I was always trying to accomplish more. Let's build this, let's build that, let's upgrade this item, let's get some new machines. But the time is here now to enjoy what I've been working for, spend time with my wife, with my kids, and enjoy music in a way that I never did before.
Have you done anything with the property over by the lake?
Nope, nothing. I bought a paddle boat to use there, and I was going to put a pier up there and never got around to it. All this stuff.
Or at least the molds for it, yeah?
What's this now?
You must have made the molds for that sink, I'm guessing.
I did, yep, I did. Let me get the lights on over here. Well, always worked with my hands. Have a large wood shop, virtually every woodworking machine, period. And about 4 or 5 months ago, I began noticing I was losing a little bit of dexterity and strength in my left hand. After about 2 months, it wasn't getting any better. So I went to my GP, and he ran some tests, and he said, you probably have ALS. The type that I have attacks the limbs, the left or the right side. In my case, it's only the left side that's bad so far. I don't feel any different than I did before I was told I have ALS, but I don't feel comfortable going down and pushing a 2-inch thick 10-foot long, 12-inch wide piece of hardwood through a table saw with no guard on it because I don't have the strength and dexterity in my left hand. So this is one of the planer drivers that I blew out. You see the repair that I put on in there?
Yep.
So, well,
grab a stand.
I'll climb in there and grab that thing. You know, I'm 76 years old. I've managed to accomplish just about all my goals. How many men live to 76? And those that do, how many can sit down and say, I've accomplished everything that I wanted to do? So I'm lucky in that sense. Have a good family, a good wife, and so I'm going to enjoy whatever time is left to the fullest. And I'll be spending a lot of time in this room, a lot of time with my wife, and finally listening to all the LPs that I have. All my kids are type A's. None of them are lazy. They all have goals, and they're well on their way to attaining them. And the difference between my kids and myself is I overdrove myself to the point where I don't enjoy life the way I will now. And I've said that. People have said, you know, what do you think about having so many years left? Well, the good thing about it is that I've been given a timeline. Look, Ken, you have 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years. So you better make the best of it. If that wouldn't have happened, I would still be doing what I was doing, building a new piece of furniture, doing this or doing that really didn't have to be done at 76. All my kids, they all helped on this. I remember when my number 2 and number 3 daughters, Patty and Rosemary, we were putting siding up on the house. Kurt helped me cast this 8-inch thick concrete floor, just the two of us. And they learned to do things that other kids don't even think about. So now I know that what I should have been doing and what all my kids are doing, they work hard, but they don't overdo it. They enjoy their family, they enjoy their free time, they have well-balanced lives, something that I will finally start attaining at 76 years old. And everywhere you look, you see clamps of all sizes and configurations. You can never have too many clamps. It's just something about putting something together that coincides with your own thoughts and dreams. Now that's not just one sentence, but it's hard to convey a thought from beginning to end, why all of this is done and why it's worth the time, trouble, and effort. The thing that I learned is that if you don't restrict yourself, if you don't tell yourself, I'm not going to dream this far because I don't think I can attain it. So many people do that. They have dreams, but they don't, for various reasons. Either it's too expensive to follow the dream, it takes too much time, they don't have the skill or ability or the knowledge to do it, so they'll more or less say, well, I think I can just shave this corner off or cut corners here or there. It's still going to be good. Too many people nowadays are not in a position to follow their dreams from beginning to end. And so many people feel that their dreams have to come to fruition 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to wait. I'm going to have to go down and buy this and do that, get a contract over here to do this because I want this thing finished so I can sit down and have fun and enjoy it. The faster you do something, the more you're going to look back and say, hey, if I would have thought that maybe I'd have a little bit more time, I wouldn't have done this. Maybe I could have designed this a little bit better. But there's nothing better than having a dream and taking the time and energy and ability to follow it through until it's just the way you want it. I told myself, this is what I want to accomplish, and I'm willing to spend the amount of time it'll take to do it. I can manage the funds to do it. I have the skills to do it, and so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'd hate like heck to see this room parted out. For one thing, it'd be pretty hard to get rid of something like these loudspeakers. Anybody that would have an interest in it would need a room as big as this. I do not want to see this stuff parted out. A couple amplifiers go here and a couple go there. that's just like breaking up a dream, and I wouldn't be happy doing that. So I have some time to look for either someone or a group of people that can carry on with what I have here. Everything in this system is part of me, and that's a good feeling.
All this talk about a stereo system, it's time to listen to it.
I know it. Well, let's see.
Where's the Led Zeppelin?
Oh, I don't. If I have one, it's purely by accident, because I would never buy any of that music. I'm sure there's some Led Zeppelin on that hard drive down there, though, because somebody in the group went ahead and did that. Let's see what we have here. The Enchantress, Tchaikovsky, opera. Don't really care for much opera.
Yeah, me neither.
But when I was up in Milwaukee before my brother passed away, I'd go down to Downtown Books, and I had a crate that I built that I FedExed up there that fit in the back of a PT Cruiser, and it would hold 780 LPs. And I would go to Downtown Books, I would buy them all. I knew Keith, he'd give me a good price on them, pay him cash. I'd pack it up and then ship it back. And I went up there one time and I saw a collection that had just come in. I said, "What's this?" He said, "It's opera." And I don't care for opera, never listened to it. But again, people that listen to opera don't play the same thing over and over until they turn the LP gray. So I said, "What do you want for the whole collection?" It was 180 records. So I bought them all from him, good price. And they're in one of these boxes someplace. Probably never going to play it, but who knows. And this is one of them. Opera, Enchantress, never listened to it, never will. but let's see, we have something. Here's a Swan Lake complete. We can take this one down.
Nice.
Yes.
Cool.
This is Melodia Angel. In fact, just for the heck of it. No spindle marks on it.
Yep.
I don't think this has even been played.
Yep.
Beautiful. This is what you go through your life collecting. And hopefully you'll live long enough to listen to all of these treasures. We can take this one down.
Nice.
When the music comes on and you close your eyes and you tell yourself, I designed and built these speakers, built the room, with the help of my family, and the turntable. Music could never sound this good any other way. You want to grab this, Scott? Yep. I'll go ahead and get the lights off. So many dreams to fulfill, so many things to live long enough to follow through on. That's better than just sitting in front of TV, drinking beer and eating chips all day long, watching football or baseball or basketball. I shouldn't say that because there are people that love to do that. It's just not my cup of tea. I'm Ken Fritz, and I believe I've built the best stereo system in the world.
we could stop it here. I wonder why he never mentioned CDs.
Nor
Is
streaming.
this is this now in the Smithsonian?
What's that, Ken?
Did he find a family member, or did he donate it to the Smithsonian so it's intact?
I think it's still in his house.
He mentioned that he wanted the room to be a part of the system, so he had said somebody would buy the entire place. Yeah. Although I recall BAS members in the early 80s had more records than he did.
28,000.
Steve O'Wades?
Who? Steve O'Wades, maybe? Okay.
Maybe 10,000 CDs, but not records.
Yeah, but if you have Rune and Cobas now, you can beat that.
How much does the Boston Symphony charge to commission a private concert?
It'd be, I'm sure it'd be just under $1 million.
For a one-time concert?
Wow, those guys making what, 100 to 200,000 each? If you want 100 players. So what do you estimate? I'm just coming out with under $1 million.
And you have to rent the room, which would be BSO.
Correct.
So the guy's got a bargain then.
Okay. Okay, that's one way to look at it.
I've seen $2 and $3 million installations in the New York area, and one, they're pale compared to this, but two, he invested himself in this, whereas most of the expensive installations, somebody just writes a check and says, well, what's the most expensive, and somebody does it for them. He did the work here.
I think a good way to look at it is if you spend the time and the money to get a good home system, and I consider a home system good if it can produce a reasonable facsimile of a live performance, then you have the flexibility to listen to any piece of music by any composer, by any orchestra at any time. And to me, that is what's very important, even though I do go in to listen to the Philadelphia Orchestra on a regular basis.
I guess no matter how you cut it, the live performance always has a little bit of an edge, because I've been at performances with various conductors and so forth where it's a invisible thing that connects the audience to the orchestra and vice versa. And there's some real drama that can happen in a live performance that doesn't happen usually on recordings. Although I was rather startled a while back to find that a number of Lenny's recordings and a number of DGGs and even now some of the newer recordings are live performances that are being issued as commercial records.
Another thing with live performances during the intermissions, you get to speak to a lot of very interesting people and make new friends sometimes.
Not only that, I attended a concert down in Florida, and the soloist came out to talk with us. And it was like, wow, that doesn't usually happen. Especially this was a world-class violinist at the time. And it was like, wow, to actually have the guy there and chat with you, or the composer sometimes, if it's a modern work, will come out and chat with you. So yeah, there are differences, but we all like to listen to a good system.
I think if Richard Goldwater were on here, he would say, save your ticket money, put it in your hi-fi system at the house.
For a psychologist to say that, I find it strange, because the listening is very much involves your brain and your interactions And the social aspect of listening is important.
Now let's not degrade Dr. Goldwater. He is a psychiatrist and an MD, not a psychologist.
Touche and more so. So there.
The interesting thing, since I moved up to the Philadelphia area, I can ride into Center City, Philadelphia on SEPTA. And since I'm an old fart, I ride for free. And you can get some very reasonably priced seats at their concerts. And the Philadelphia Orchestra is quite good.
What's reasonable in Philadelphia?
Their tickets, the last thing I went to, which was Symphony Fantastique, I actually found a seat in the orchestra that was $20.
Oh, come on.
Oh, $20, I'm telling you. Wow. And they have specials where you can get like 4 concerts, a series of 4 concerts, and they start at about $40 and go up. I think the highest prices are like about $160 to $180.
You remember when we had a meeting at Symphony Hall, I was chatting with the chief engineer, and he said when he wants to hear the best rendition, he sits in the second balcony. So there's no need to spend the top ticket on the floor if you can hear the best music up there.
I think best music is a personal choice, because I've been all over different halls, and where I like to sit is not where other people like to sit, and it's purely a matter of personal taste.
Yeah.
Okay, we have about 2 more minutes left. More comments?
Well, on the live music thing, this is Organ Week in New Haven. So every day there's been organ concerts. I've been to 4 of them because there's 6 organs in New Haven, and they're all free. So nothing can accommodate an organ, a real organ, like a large venue with a, Justice may remember, there's at Woolsey Hall, there's the air generator is like 1,500 watts, something like that. I can't remember.
You can't recreate a hall experience in a home room.
Yeah.
You just can't. And to that end, I got to say, personally, I've discovered or rediscovered that smaller local halls like Mechanics Hall in Worcester, which I'm not too far from, and the Worcester Symphony Orchestra do a great job. And seats are cheap, and you can get an experience there that you just can't match. They did Brahms' First Symphony recently. It blew me away.
Yeah, Mechanics Hall is one of the better halls in the area.
It is.
And the Lexington Symphony, they're another organization that is actually first class.
They are.
Lexington, Mass. Jonathan McPhee does a fabulous job with them, and they are first class, really. And the tickets are a little less expensive than the BSO and Symphony Hall, and the Boston Civic Symphony is very, very good. There are a number of players in that are lifers, and it's mostly a volunteer organization. But they're literally doing most of their performances now at Jordan Hall at the New England Conservatory.
Okay. It's 4:30, so that was 2.5 hours, and I think we should clap for our guests, Les Williams, Bob Carver, Ron Dunlap, and Justin.
Justice.
Justice. Thank you guys very much. See you next week or next month.
Next week. Wow. I wanted to make one last comment on the BAS speaker article on Major Armstrong. I don't know how many of you have seen the issue or have read it, but it's an interesting triptych of what Armstrong developed, who was considered kind of the father of FM radio. There's an interesting side story about that. He actually was the one who installed, I believe, the original transmitter on Great Blue Hill for WGBH in Boston. And their first broadcast in 1950 was a live symphony orchestra broadcast from Boston Symphony Hall.
Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.